The chain had barely closed around the school gates when 10-year-old Samuel began screaming without sound. Duchess Clara turned as the deaf boy fought past a servant, seized the Duke of Ravensmere's sleeve, and signed a dead man's name into the air. Lord Wycliffe. Julian pulled away as though the child had dirtied his coat. Only minutes earlier, he had accused Clara of stealing £300 from the charitable trust and transferred her school to his cousin, Lord Edmund Harcourt. Now 40 donors, 2 magistrates, and a line of frightened children stood watching the final destruction of her reputation. "Take him inside," Julian ordered. "The school is chained," Clara said. "Then take him to the carriage." Samuel struck the servant's hands away. His fingers moved urgently. Red carriage, locked room, 3 men. Clara caught his wrists before he could continue. Purple bruises circled his left arm, and a dark impression marked the centre of his palm. "Who did this to you?" Samuel looked toward Lord Edmund. The Duke's cousin stood beside the gate, holding the new school charter. His face remained composed, but his fingers tightened around the parchment. "That boy has always invented stories," Edmund said. Lady Ravensmere encouraged such performances whenever donors visited. Clara felt the accusation travel through the crowd. 6 years of work could be destroyed more easily than a single sheet of paper. She had taught these children to read, write, calculate, and communicate with their families, yet one sentence from a nobleman had reduced their language to a performance. She turned Samuel's hand toward the light. Someone had pressed a signet ring against his skin with enough force to leave the image of a raven, the Ravensmere crest. Julian saw it and went still. "Where did you get that mark?" he demanded. Samuel could not hear the anger in his voice, but he saw it. The boy recoiled and hid behind Clara's skirts. "You are frightening him," she said. "He has accused a member of my family of murder. No, he has told us what he witnessed. He has made gestures you chose to interpret." The words hurt more than Clara allowed her face to show. Julian had once sat beside her for an entire winter, learning the alphabet of the hands. When her younger sister had lost her hearing after scarlet fever, he had watched Clara struggle to reach her and promised that no child on his estate would be left imprisoned in silence. That promise had become this school. Now he was pretending the language did not exist. Clara raised her hands and signed slowly to Samuel. "Show me the man." Samuel looked past Edmund toward the gathered gentlemen. His eyes moved from one face to another before settling on Julian. Then he pointed directly at the Duke. A murmur broke through the crowd. Julian's expression hardened. "There, you see what nonsense this is." But Samuel shook his head violently. He pointed at Julian's raven-shaped signet ring, then at the mark in his palm. Afterward, he pointed toward Edmund and made the sign for same. Clara understood. "The man wore your family crest," she said. "Samuel is not accusing you. He is saying Lord Edmund possesses the same ring." Every gaze shifted toward the Duke's cousin. Edmund lifted his bare hands. "My signet was lost weeks ago. Clara knows that perfectly well. I knew no such thing. You were told at dinner. I have not dined with you since May." A woman among the trustees coughed to conceal her discomfort. Julian glanced down at the false ledger resting beneath his arm, but he did not open it. Clara had asked him 3 times to compare its figures with the bank receipts. 3 times he had refused because Edmund had promised him enough parliamentary support to secure a royal appointment. This was no misunderstanding. Julian had chosen which truth was useful to him. A constable approached Samuel. "We should question the boy privately." "No," Clara said. The man stopped. "Your Grace? Samuel cannot understand you, and you cannot understand him. He will not be taken anywhere without me." "You possess no authority here," Edmund reminded her. "The trustees removed you this morning." "Then I speak as the only person present capable of hearing his testimony." Edmund stepped closer. A convenient distinction. Samuel tugged Clara's sleeve again. This time he signed beneath the folds of her cloak, hiding his hands from the others. Lord Wycliffe was alive here. Clara struggled to keep her breathing even. When, 3 nights ago, Lord Wycliffe's body had been discovered beside the northern road that same night, the magistrate claimed highway robbery, although his purse, watch, and horse had all been recovered. No one had explained why a dying man would travel toward Ravensmere after midnight. Samuel added another sign. "Below." "Below where?" Clara whispered. He pointed through the chained gates toward the school. Edmund immediately moved between them. "This spectacle has continued long enough. The children must be removed before nightfall. Why before nightfall? Clara asked. Because the building is no longer safe. It was declared sound last month. The cellar wall has begun to collapse. Clara watched Samuel's face change at the word cellar. He could not hear it, but he had read the shape on Edmund's lips. The boy backed against her and signed with trembling fingers. Locked room below. Lord Wycliffe knocked on the wall. Then the knocking stopped. Clara looked at Julian. Open the gates, she said. Search the cellar before you give Edmund control of it. Julian did not look toward the school. My decision has already been made. He placed the keys in Edmund's palm. The building belongs to its new governor. My wife will leave the estate before sunset. There was no hesitation for Clara to mistake as hope. Julian had been offered one last chance to investigate, and he had deliberately chosen the version of events that protected his ambition. Clara stared at the keys resting in Edmund's palm. With that single choice, Julian had given the accused man control of the witness, the records, and the room where Lord Wycliffe might have spent his final hours. Then a dull knock sounded beneath the school courtyard. Once, twice. Samuel gripped Clara's hand. A third knock came from below, and this time everyone heard it. The third knock came harder than the first two. One of the trustees stepped away from the gate. There is someone beneath that courtyard. Edmund slid the keys into his coat. Old heating pipes run under the building. The sound travels whenever the kitchen fire is lit. The kitchen fire was extinguished this morning, Clara said. Several donors glanced toward the chimney. No smoke rose from it. Julian looked at Edmund. Open the gate. The cellar wall is unstable. Then we shall remain above it. Open the gate. For the first time that morning, Edmund hesitated before obeying the Duke. Samuel watched his hand select a long iron key, then signed to Clara. Not that one. Edmund tried 2 keys that did not fit. With every failure, the murmurs behind him grew louder. You governed this school for less than an hour, Clara said. Have you already forgotten which key opens it? His mouth tightened. He chose a smaller brass key, and the lock turned. Clara entered with Samuel beside her. Julian followed, along with the constable and 3 trustees, while Edmund ordered everyone else to remain outside. The schoolroom had been stripped of its books, but chalk lessons still covered the boards. 12 names had been written beneath the sentence. I have something worth saying. A servant had drawn a black line through every name. Clara stopped before Samuel could see it. She took the cloth from the ledge and erased the line. You have been dismissed, Edmund said behind her. I am still their teacher until they have somewhere safe to go. You are accused of stealing their money, and the original accounts that could answer that accusation are inside this building. Julian shifted the false ledger beneath his arm. The accounts were examined by Edmund's clerk, not by the trustees, not by the bank, and not by me. You were responsible for them, which is why I know this ledger records payments on Sundays, when the bank was closed. The constable looked at Julian. Is that true? Clara answered before her husband could. Open it to the 21st of April. You will find a withdrawal of £40. Julian turned the pages. The entry was there. That Sunday was Easter, Clara continued. The bank did not conduct business, and I was in the chapel before most of these witnesses. Lady Merrow, the oldest trustee, nodded. She sat beside me. Edmund gave a dismissive shrug. A clerk may have entered the wrong date. 16 times? Silence settled over the schoolroom. Samuel pointed toward the empty hooks beside the blackboard. The large accounts slate was gone. Lady Merrow stepped closer. It was hanging there yesterday. I watched the older pupils update it before I left. A servant near the door lowered his eyes. Clara noticed. Who removed it? She asked. The man glanced toward Edmund before answering. Mr. Harlan ordered me to carry it to the red carriage before sunrise. Edmund's voice hardened. You were told to remove unused school materials. The slate was not unused, Lady Merrow said. It contained the trust figures witnessed by 6 pupils and 2 trustees. The constable faced the servant. Did Mr. Harlan give any reason for taking it? No, sir, but he warned me that if anyone asked, I was to say the Duchess had removed it herself. The room went quiet. Edmund had not been exposed by another calculation. His own servant had revealed that the missing evidence was removed before Clara was publicly accused. Clara interpreted his signs aloud. Julian stared at Samuel, then at the empty hooks. A child's arithmetic is hardly evidence, Edmund said. No, Clara replied, but it proves the accusation and the observable balance cannot both be true. Another knock sounded below them. Samuel rushed toward the rear passage. Edmund seized his shoulder, but Clara caught his wrist. "Do not touch him again." The quietness of her voice made Edmund release the boy. He leaned closer. "Your husband has removed your authority. My authority over Samuel did not come from my marriage. Everything you possess comes from Ravensmere." Clara looked past him at Julian. She expected him to deny it. Once, he would have done so without hesitation. He remained silent. Something inside her went still. "Then hear me clearly," she said. "I will obey the order to leave Ravensmere House. I will not surrender these children to a man they fear, and I will not leave this building until we identify who is trapped below it." Julian's face tightened. "You cannot defy me before the entire county. You accuse me before the entire county. You may endure my answer in the same place." Samuel had reached the cellar door. It stood at the end of the passage, beneath a narrow window, secured by a new iron padlock. Clara touched the metal. "This was not here yesterday." "The wall is dangerous," Edmund repeated. A faint scraping came from the other side. Julian stepped forward. "Give me the key." Edmund produced a ring containing 4 black keys. None opened the padlock. Clara crouched beside Samuel. "When did you last see Miss Bell?" His hands moved quickly. "Yesterday. She stayed after lessons. She found something in the accounts room." Margaret Bell had been Clara's first adult pupil and now taught the youngest children. Deaf since infancy, she could not call for help if someone had locked her below. Samuel added that Margaret had followed Lord Wycliffe toward the cellar 3 nights earlier. Clara rose. "Break the lock." Edmund moved in front of the door. "You risk bringing the ceiling down on all of us." Julian stared at his cousin. "Move." When Edmund refused, the constable pushed him aside and struck the padlock with an iron poker. The first blow bent it, the second tore it free. The cellar door opened onto darkness. Clara took a lamp and descended before anyone could stop her. Samuel followed until Julian caught him at the top step. At the bottom, Clara found a storeroom with empty shelves and a trail of blood leading behind a coal partition. She pulled the boards aside. Margaret Bell lay on the floor with her ankles bound and a cloth tied across her mouth. Clara dropped beside her and removed the gag. Margaret's eyes opened, wild with fear. Her hands rose weakly. He took the original ledger. "Who?" Margaret looked up the stairs, where Edmund stood beside the Duke. Then she signed a name that made Clara's blood run cold. "Julian." Clara kept her eyes on Margaret's hands. "Julian, order. Take records." Margaret did not sign that Julian had attacked her. She signed that the attacker had carried an order bearing the Duke's name. "Did you see his grace in this cellar?" Clara asked. Margaret shook her head. "Did you see Lord Edmund?" Another shake of the head. "Then what did you see?" Margaret touched 2 fingers to her palm, mimicking a written signature. Afterward, she pointed toward the false ledger under Julian's arm. "A signed paper." The man showed it before taking the records. Clara looked up the stairs. "Did you authorize someone to remove my accounts before this morning?" Julian's face changed. Edmund answered for him. "His Grace authorized an independent examination 3 days ago." 3 days ago? Clara rose slowly. "Before I was informed that any money was missing." "You were informed as soon as the discrepancy was confirmed by the man you allowed to create the discrepancy." Julian descended 2 steps. "I signed an order allowing Edmund's clerk to inspect the records. Nothing more." "Did you read it?" "It was a routine authorization." "Did you read it?" His silence answered her. Clara had seen that silence before. During the first years of their marriage, Julian had brought every estate contract to her because she noticed what impatient men overlooked. After Edmund began promising him influence in Parliament, Julian stopped asking questions that might inconvenience his ambition. Margaret gripped Clara's sleeve. Her hands moved again. "Lord Wycliffe came after sunset. He asked for the donation book. He said the names were being used twice." "Which names?" Clara asked. "Children, donors, dead men." Julian descended another step. "What does she mean?" Lord Wycliffe believed someone had copied names from the school records. Clara turned to Margaret. "Did he say why?" "Vote." The word struck the cellar harder than the constable's poker had struck the lock. Lord Wycliffe had represented the neighbouring borough in Parliament. 2 weeks earlier, he had announced that he possessed proof of fraudulent property qualifications used to create false voters. 3 nights later, he was dead. Edmund leaned over the stair rail. A frightened woman has been imprisoned in darkness. Her recollection cannot be trusted. Margaret saw his lips. Her fear turned to anger. She pushed herself upright and signed with sharp precision. I was locked here because I can read. Clara repeated the sentence aloud. The constable looked toward Edmund. Who knew Miss Bell remained at the school? Anyone might have known, he replied. No, Clara said. Margaret's name was removed from the staff register last month, although she continued teaching every day. Only the trustees and the person altering our accounts would know she was here. Julian opened the false ledger. Her name is not listed. That is precisely the contradiction. He studied the page, but Edmund stepped down and closed the book with one hand. This cellar is unsafe. We should take Miss Bell upstairs. Margaret flinched when he approached. Clara moved between them. You will not come near her. You have no place to take her. I do. Lady Merrow owned a small house beside the village chapel. She had offered its upper rooms whenever winter storms prevented the children from travelling home. Clara had declined before because Julian insisted the school should never depend upon favours from another estate. Now his pride no longer mattered. Clara helped Margaret stand. Lady Merrow will shelter her and the children until the trustees conduct a proper examination. Julian's expression hardened. You cannot remove pupils whose guardians entrusted them to Ravensmere. They entrusted them to the school under my direction. Your order closed that school. Edmund is its new governor. Then he may govern an empty building. At the top of the stairs, Samuel embraced Margaret. She held him tightly, then touched the pocket of her torn dress. It was empty. Margaret searched it twice before signing that Lord Wycliffe had given her a folded page from a red notebook. She had hidden it when footsteps approached, but her attacker had searched her clothes. Where did you hide it? Clara asked. Margaret pointed toward the schoolroom. They returned to find two servants packing the remaining slates into wooden crates under Edmund's orders. Clara stopped them before they could close the final lid. Margaret crossed to a low shelf where the pupils stored counting cords. Each cord carried wooden beads used to teach addition. She selected Samuel's, pulled at its frayed blue end, and removed a narrow roll of paper concealed inside the hollow handle. Edmund's composure broke. He reached for it. Clara passed it to Lady Merrow instead. A trustee should hold the evidence. The older woman unfolded the page. It contained a column of names, small payments, and addresses. Beside 6 names stood the same word, Ravensmere. Julian read over her shoulder. These may be legitimate donations. 3 of those men are dead, Lady Merrow said. I attended their funerals. At the bottom of the page, Lord Wycliffe had written a single instruction. Ask the children who taught them to copy the dead men's signatures. Julian looked toward the pupils. Edmund recovered quickly. Clara taught them writing. If signatures were copied in this school, that instruction implicates your wife. Clara. The accusation landed exactly where he intended. The trustees began whispering again. Clara took Samuel's practice book from a nearby desk. Every page showed ordinary letters, simple words, and the boy's own name. No legal signatures appeared anywhere. Bring me the advanced copybooks, she said. A servant opened the cupboard. The shelves were empty. Edmund turned to the constable. Search Duchess Clara's carriage. If she removed those books, they will prove she trained the children for this fraud. Julian stared at the empty cupboard. Doubt flickered across his face, but he forced it away. Search the carriage, he ordered. Clara watched Edmund smile. He had expected the hidden page, the missing books, and her objection. He had prepared for all 3. Outside, a servant shouted that something had been found beneath the seat of Clara's carriage. The constable returned, carrying 12 children's copybooks filled with the signatures of dead men. The constable placed the 12 copybooks on the nearest desk. Were these found in her Grace's carriage? The servant nodded. Inside a leather case, beneath the rear seat. Clara recognized the case. It had belonged to her younger sister and usually held the school's unused lesson cards. She had locked it inside the supply cupboard the previous evening. Who brought my carriage to the school? She asked. One of Lord Edmund's grooms. Edmund turned on the servant. That is irrelevant. The books were found among the Duchess's possessions. Clara opened the first copybook. Page after page contained the names from Lord Wycliffe's list, written repeatedly until the signatures appeared convincing. Red corrections covered the margins. Julian pointed to one. That is your handwriting. It resembles mine. You corrected the children's lessons in red ink. So did every teacher here. Edmund faced the trustees. The Duchess used pupils who could not hear the names spoken against them. She taught them to forge signatures, then hid the evidence when Lord Wycliffe discovered her scheme. Several donors moved away from Clara. Samuel watched their faces. He could not hear the accusation, but he understood what their fear meant. His shoulders folded inward. Clara opened another book and saw his name written on its cover. She placed it before him and signed a question. "Is this yours?" Samuel shook his head. "Of course he denies it," Edmund said. Clara did not argue. She turned to Margaret. "Ask him to identify his real copybook." Margaret signed the request using her own phrasing. Samuel crossed the room and selected a thin green book from beneath his desk. He opened it to a page filled with block letters. Clara placed the two books side by side. "These are not merely different styles of handwriting," she said. "Look at the dates." The planted book claimed Samuel had copied signatures each afternoon during the previous 6 weeks. Lady Merrow leaned closer. "What is wrong with that?" For 3 of those weeks, Samuel's right hand was splintered after he fell from an apple tree." The boy held up his palm. A pale scar still crossed the base of his thumb. The village surgeon had treated him before 2 trustees and half the school. He had completed his lessons with his left hand until the swelling subsided. Yet every signature in the planted book had been written with smooth, right-handed strokes. The constable looked at Edmund. "Someone appears to have created this after the boy recovered. Or the Duchess ordered another pupil to write in his name," Edmund replied. Clara closed the book. Whatever contradiction she exposed, Edmund turned it into another accusation. He did not need a perfect lie. He only needed enough confusion to make Julian choose the version that protected his political ambitions. Lady Merrow lifted the leather case. "Who possessed the key to the supply cupboard?" "Clara," Julian answered. "And the school governor," Clara said. "There were 2 copies. Mine remained on my ring until your husband ordered me to surrender it. Edmund received the 2nd copy 3 days ago when Julian authorized the examination." Julian looked toward his cousin. Edmund's reply came without hesitation. "I gave it to my clerk." "What is his name?" the constable asked. "Mr. Harlan." "Where is he?" "Returning to London." Margaret suddenly struck the desk with her palm. Everyone turned. She signed that the man who locked her in the cellar had worn a dark green coat and carried a silver-headed cane. Clara repeated the description. The servant beside the door went pale. "What is it?" the constable asked. "Mr. Harlan wore such a coat this morning," the servant admitted, "and he carried Lord Edmund's cane." Edmund crossed the room so quickly that the man stepped back. "You are mistaken. I polished the silver handle myself, my lord." Julian had heard enough to doubt, but not enough to abandon the future Edmund had promised him. His gaze settled on the books rather than the frightened servant. "Find Harlan," he told the constable. "Until then, none of this proves who ordered the forgeries." "It proves Clara should not be arrested," Lady Merrow said. "It proves an inquiry is necessary." "An inquiry controlled by Edmund?" Julian's patience broke. "The school stands on my land. The trust bears my family name. I will determine how it is examined." "And while you determine it," Clara said, "what happens to the children?" "They will remain under Edmund's supervision." Samuel read the decision on Julian's lips. He seized Clara's hand with both of his. "No." She felt his panic before he signed the rest. "Red carriage comes at night. Men take children one at a time." Clara looked through the schoolroom window. A red carriage waited beyond the trees. The same carriage Samuel claimed to have seen on the night Lord Wycliffe died. "We are leaving now," she said. Edmund stepped before the door. "The pupils belong to the trust. They are not property. Their guardians signed placement agreements." Lady Merrow raised her cane. "And those agreements appoint the Duchess of Ravensmere as superintendent. Remove her, and every placement must be reconsidered." Edmund's expression sharpened. He had not expected the elderly trustee to challenge him. Julian turned to Clara. "If you take them from the estate, it will be treated as evidence that you intend to flee. I intend to place them beyond Edmund's reach. You will make yourself appear guilty. I would rather appear guilty than leave them here to disappear." The words struck something in Julian. For one moment, he looked like the man who had once helped her carry benches into the first classroom. Then Edmund whispered, "If she removes the children, the royal appointment is finished. Your opponents will say you cannot govern your own household." Julian's face closed again. Clara gathered the pupils near the door. Margaret stood beside her, still weak but refusing assistance. Lady Merrow ordered her coachman to prepare every available carriage for the short journey to the chapel house. Edmund signalled to the constable, "Arrest her if she attempts to leave." The man did not move. "On what charge?" "Abduction, destruction of evidence, fraud. You require a sworn accusation." Edmund drew a prepared document from his coat and placed it before Julian. Only the Duke's signature was missing. Clara stared at the paper. "Before you sign that, send one messenger to the bank. Ask whether any of the missing money ever left the trust account." Lady Merrow added, "I will accompany him. We can return before sunset." It was the simplest possible test. If the £300 remained in the bank, the entire accusation against Clara would collapse. Julian picked up the pen. Clara searched his face. "You have one final chance to choose the truth before your pride makes the choice for you." Edmund placed the ink beside his hand. Outside, the driver of the red carriage opened its door. Julian lowered the pen to the accusation. Lady Merrow struck her cane against the floor. "If you sign before examining the bank, you will not be correcting an error later. You will be choosing one." His hand paused. Edmund glanced toward the red carriage. "Every minute we delay gives the Duchess another opportunity to remove evidence." Clara held Julian's gaze. "Send the messenger. You have already decided I am guilty," he said. "I asked for the simplest test available. You asked me to humiliate my cousin before the trustees. No, I asked you to discover whether £300 still exists." The distinction only deepened his anger. Julian signed his name with a single hard stroke. The constable read the document. It accused Clara of fraud, destruction of charitable records, and coercion of the school's pupils. It also placed every child, teacher, document, and property belonging to the trust under Edmund's temporary authority. Clara looked at her husband. "You gave him the witnesses. I gave him responsibility for their safety." Samuel saw Edmund fold the document and began backing toward the rear passage. Edmund pointed at him. "That boy travels separately." Clara stepped between them. "Why? He has been influenced more thoroughly than the others. He is the only person who saw Lord Wycliffe here." "According to your interpretation." Margaret moved beside Clara and signed that she had also seen Wycliffe enter the school. She had watched him descend to the cellar with a man wearing a raven signet. Later, she saw Samuel hiding beneath the stairs. Clara repeated every word. Julian looked at Margaret. "Can she write her statement?" "Yes." "Then she will do so under Edmund's supervision." Margaret laughed without sound. The bitterness in her face needed no interpretation. Clara turned to the constable. "Will you enforce this?" The man studied Julian's signature. "I am required to honour a sworn accusation from the landowner and principal trustee." "You heard the servant identify Edmund's cane." "I did." "You saw the false dates." "I did." "And you will still give him control of the witnesses?" The constable's discomfort showed, but he lowered his eyes. "The document leaves me no discretion." That was how men like Edmund succeeded, not because everyone believed them, but because frightened people obeyed each separate order and pretended they bore no responsibility for the result. 2 hired attendants entered from the courtyard. They wore no school insignia, and Clara had never seen either man near Ravensmere. "Take the children to the carriage," Edmund ordered. Lady Merrow blocked the doorway with her cane. "My coaches are prepared." "The Duke's order supersedes your offer." "Where are you taking them?" "Institutions suited to their condition." Clara felt Samuel grip the back of her dress. The phrase "suited to their condition" meant workhouses, private asylums, and distant apprenticeships from which few children ever returned. If Edmund separated them, no magistrate would hear their combined testimony. She faced Julian. "You once promised me these children would never be punished for being unable to hear. They are not being punished." "Then ask Edmund to name the institutions." Julian did not ask Edmund where the children were being taken. "He has provided a list of temporary lodgings," he said. "That is sufficient until the inquiry is complete." Clara stared at him. "Have you read the list?" "I have no reason to question it. St. Ormond's house is named first. It closed after a fever outbreak last winter." Edmund answered smoothly. "It has reopened under new management." "Whose management?" "My clerk's." "The same clerk who removed the records, carried your silver cane, and has now disappeared." The constable stepped between Samuel and the attendant holding the cord. "No child will be bound while I am present, he said. Julian remained beside Edmund. The children will be taken to Ravensmere House until their placement is settled. Your cousin controls the household guard, Clara said. I control my house. Then why does every order spoken inside it belong to him? Clara stared at him. Your cousin controls the household guard. I control my house. Do you? The question landed harder than a shout. Julian motioned to the constable. Escort my wife to the west rooms. She is not to communicate with the pupils until the bank responds. You have not sent anyone to the bank. I will send a man of my choosing. Edmund whispered something to him. Julian's expression shifted. Tomorrow morning. By tomorrow morning, the children and records may be gone. They will remain at Ravensmere. Clara knew he was lying to himself because the alternative required admitting what his ambition had allowed into their home. She looked at Margaret and signed beneath her shawl. Kitchen door. Take the children to Lady Merrow. Margaret's eyes widened. Clara turned toward the constable and offered her wrists. If I cooperate, will you allow me to say farewell? You may have 1 minute. She knelt before Samuel and embraced him. Hidden between them, her fingers moved against his back. Follow Margaret. Do not enter Red Carriage. Find Wycliffe's widow. Samuel pulled away with tears shining in his eyes. Edmund watched their faces, but could not see Clara's hands. Margaret suddenly collapsed beside the desk. Every child rushed toward her. The trustees shouted for water, and the 2 attendants tried to force their way through the crowd. Samuel disappeared among the grey school coats. Clara allowed the constable to lead her into the courtyard. She did not look toward the kitchen passage. If Edmund saw her search for Samuel, he would understand. As they passed the red carriage, its driver hurried to cover 3 wooden crates with a blanket. 1 crate had split along the side. Inside were dozens of folded property certificates, bearing the copied signatures of the dead men from Lord Wycliffe's list. A label had been nailed across the lid. Ravensmere Borough, deliver to the election clerk before midnight. Clara stopped. Edmund had not used the children merely to steal charitable money. He had used their hands to manufacture landowners, create illegal votes, and decide a parliamentary election. Julian's promised royal appointment depended upon that victory. By signing the accusation, he had just given Edmund the authority needed to deliver the forged certificates and silence every witness before midnight. Then Clara saw a small hand appear beneath the blanket inside the carriage. Samuel had climbed into the crate, carrying the fraudulent deeds. Clara did not look at Samuel's hand again. If Edmund realized the boy was inside the carriage, he would drag him out before the forged certificates ever left Ravensmere. She allowed the constable to lead her past the vehicle, then stumbled deliberately beside its rear wheel. Her shoulder struck the wooden panel. Inside, Samuel went perfectly still. Clara pressed 2 fingers against the carriage wall, paused, then tapped the rhythm she used to begin every school lesson. Watch, wait, stay hidden. The driver climbed onto his seat. Move on, Edmund ordered. The red carriage rolled toward the eastern road, carrying the false property certificates, and the only witness who knew Lord Wycliffe had been imprisoned beneath the school. Clara waited until it passed through the gates. Then she turned to the constable. Samuel is inside that carriage. The man stopped. You allowed it to leave? If I had spoken earlier, Edmund would have taken him. Now you have lawful reason to follow a missing child. Julian heard her from the school steps. What has Samuel done? He is protecting evidence you placed in Edmund's hands. She told him what she had seen inside the broken crate. The colour left Julian's face. Those cannot be election certificates. They carry the names from Wycliffe's notebook. Edmund stepped toward his horse. She is inventing another accusation because the books were found in her carriage. The crate was in yours, Clara said. It belongs to the trust. Property qualifications do not belong to a school for deaf children. Julian seized the reins before Edmund could mount. Open the crates. They are already gone. Then we follow them. Edmund held his cousin's gaze. If you ride into the county hall repeating your wife's accusation, you will destroy your appointment before the election even begins. If those certificates are genuine, examining them will change nothing. And if they are not, your family seal appears on every page. Julian released the reins, as though they had burned him. Clara understood then why Edmund had worked so hard to make her appear guilty. If the fraud was exposed, Julian would claim that his wife had deceived him. If it succeeded, Edmund would deliver the parliamentary seat Julian had been promised. Either result protected Edmund. Only Julian's refusal to investigate had made both outcomes possible. The constable ordered 2 men to follow the carriage. Julian mounted his own horse and rode with them, leaving Clara under guard. She watched him disappear down the road. He had finally chosen to seek the truth, but only after his own name was in danger. Clara was confined in the west drawing room at Ravensmere House. The door remained locked, and 2 guards stood beneath the windows. Edmund had ordered the other pupils brought to the estate, but Margaret's distraction had worked. Lady Merrow's coaches reached the chapel house with 11 children before Julian's men closed the village road. Samuel alone remained missing. Clara paced until footsteps sounded in the corridor. The door opened, and Lady Merrow entered carrying a bank statement. A guard followed her. £300 remains in the trust account, the older woman announced. Not a penny was stolen. Clara closed her eyes for one brief moment. Her name was not restored. Margaret's wounds were not undone. Samuel was not safe. Yet the first lie had broken. Did the bank manager sign it? And seal it. I made 3 copies before returning. Keep them in separate places. Lady Merrow handed 1 copy to the constable, 1 to Margaret at the chapel house, and concealed the 3rd inside her cane. The guard shifted near the door. Clara lowered her voice. Has Julian returned? No. A horse galloped into the courtyard. Moments later, Julian entered without his hat. Dust covered his coat, and 1 sleeve had been torn at the cuff. Where is Samuel? Clara asked. We reached the county hall after the carriage. Where is he? Julian looked away. Clara's fear sharpened into fury. Answer me! The crates were delivered through the rear entrance. By the time we opened them, Samuel was gone. You lost him. I did not know he was there. You knew Edmund controlled the carriage. That should have been enough. Julian placed a hand on the table. The certificates have already been entered into the borough register. Withdraw them. I cannot. You are the Duke of Ravensmere, and my signature authorized Edmund to act for the school trust. The election clerk accepted the documents under that authority. Removing them now requires a public examination before the county magistrates. Clara heard the consequence in every word. Julian had always believed power meant his orders could repair whatever his orders destroyed. Now the document he had signed against her prevented him from quietly correcting the fraud. Lady Merrow placed the bank statement before him. The money never left the account. Julian read it twice. Clara watched certainty collapse from his face. Edmund told me the bank had confirmed the loss, he said. And you believed him because his lie offered you something my truth did not. Julian sank into a chair. The election clerk found 114 certificates, he said. If accepted, they create enough voters to decide the borough. How many carry the Ravensmere seal? All of them. A servant arrived with a letter. Julian broke the wax and read it without speaking. What is it? Lady Merrow asked. The Crown has suspended consideration of my appointment. A royal examiner is coming at dawn to investigate Wycliffe's death and the election certificates. There was his first loss, tied directly to the choice he had made against Clara, but she felt no satisfaction. Samuel remained in Edmund's hands. Where is your cousin? She asked. His horse was found near the county hall. And Mr. Harlan? Gone. Clara spread Lord Wycliffe's page beside the bank statement. The names were not random. Each dead donor had once rented a cottage from Ravensmere. Edmund had transformed charitable records into property claims because those records supplied names, old addresses, and signatures that appeared respectable. The children had not been taught to steal money. They had been forced to manufacture voters. Where were the signatures copied? Julian asked. Not in the classroom. Samuel would have recognized the men who supervised him. He signed that there were 3 men in the locked room. Clara remembered the gesture he had made during the first accusation, a crooked finger drawn across his palm. She had not understood it then. Now she did. It was not a name. It was the sign Samuel had invented for a printing press, the curved handle pulled across a flat bed. The cellar was not merely a prison, she said. They brought a press into the underground passage. Julian stood. There is no press beneath the school. Not anymore. But the old estate map shows that passage continuing beneath the road. To where? Clara pointed east. The abandoned toll house. The clock on the mantel began striking 11. The fraudulent certificates had to be formally challenged before the polls opened at 8 in the morning. They had 9 hours to find Samuel, locate the press, and produce evidence that could survive a public examination. A stone shattered the window. Tied around it was Samuel's blue counting cord and a message written in Edmund's hand. Withdraw the challenge before dawn, or the boy will never use his hands again. Julian crushed Edmund's message in his fist. I will send every guard on the estate to the toll house. No, Clara said. He threatened a child, and he expects you to answer with force. If armed riders approach openly, Edmund will move Samuel or carry out the threat. Julian turned toward the door. I will not stand here. Then you will follow my instructions. The room fell silent. Until that moment, Julian had always assumed cooperation meant Clara assisting him. Now, she made the terms unmistakable. You will withdraw your guards from the chapel road, she said. Lady Merrow will take me there, beyond Edmund's household authority. The constable will accompany us. Margaret will show us what Samuel signed, and no order will be issued without my agreement. I am still responsible for what happens on my estate. No, you surrendered that responsibility when you signed it over to Edmund. Julian flinched. Clara continued. You may provide the old passage map and answer every question I ask. That is the extent of your authority tonight. He looked at the threat again. And after we find Samuel? This is not a negotiation for my forgiveness. I did not say it was. You were about to. Julian lowered his eyes. You are right. It was the first honest surrender she had heard from him that day, but it repaired nothing by itself. Lady Merrow's chapel house became Clara's base before midnight. 11 children slept together in the upper rooms, while Margaret kept watch beside the stairs. The bank statement, Lord Wycliffe's page, and one planted copybook had been separated among 3 responsible witnesses. Julian arrived carrying a rolled estate map. He spread it across the dining table. The passage begins beneath the school cellar and follows the old drainage line. My grandfather sealed the toll house entrance 40 years ago. Someone reopened it, Clara said. The masonry should have required several men. Edmund had your servants, your money, and your written authority. Julian had no answer. Lady Merrow set a stack of household reports beside him. While you are learning what your cousin did with your authority, you may also learn what your wife did without recognition. The reports showed school expenses Clara had quietly paid from her own pin money when donations arrived late. They also recorded winter coal, purchased for tenants, wages advanced to widowed mothers, and 12 apprenticeships arranged for older pupils. Julian turned page after page. Why did none of this reach my estate accounts? Because Edmund advised you to remove charitable spending from the main books, Clara said. He told you it made Ravensmere appear weak before your political patrons, and you continued paying for it. The children still needed to eat after you stopped wanting to see the expense. He looked at her as though he finally understood the scale of what he had dismissed. I thought the school had become a way for you to avoid our marriage. Clara's expression tightened. The school became the place where promises were still kept. Julian closed the reports. I chose ambition over the person who had never deceived me, he said. Whatever Edmund did, that choice was mine. Yes, I will say so before the royal examiner. You will say it because it is true, not because it purchases anything from me. I understand. Clara did not tell him whether she believed that. Margaret entered and placed Samuel's blue counting cord on the map. She had examined the broken end and found black grease pressed into the fibers. Printing grease. Samuel had held the cord while hiding among the crates. The stain confirmed he had reached the press after leaving the county hall. Margaret pointed to the toll house and signed, He leaves marks when frightened. Clara remembered Samuel's habit of dragging his left shoe whenever he wanted another pupil to follow him. He had learned that visible trails could speak when voices could not. They entered the school cellar through the rear passage at midnight. The constable led with a lantern. Clara followed beside Margaret, while Julian remained behind them as promised. A thin scrape ran through the dust along the left wall. Samuel's shoe. The passage ended beneath the abandoned toll house. Voices sounded above them. How many more? A man asked. 20 signatures, another replied. Harcourt wants the final list before dawn. Clara recognized the second voice as Mr. Harlan's. Edmund was not with him. Samuel sat beside the printing press with his wrists tied loosely in front of him. A guard stood near the outer door. Harlan bent over the missing school ledger, copying names onto fresh property certificates. Clara touched Margaret's shoulder and signed a sequence. Lamp, window, boy, door. Margaret nodded. Julian reached for the pistol at his belt, but Clara stopped him. If that guard fires, Samuel is beside the powder tray. She took a small slate from the passage wall and scratched 4 words across it. Look at the cellar door. Margaret pushed the slate through a gap near the floor. Samuel saw it first. He did not react. Instead, he signed beneath the table, where the guard could not see. 1 guard, Harlan afraid. Edmund returns at 2. Clara answered through the gap. When lamp goes dark, crawl. Margaret reached a hand through the opening and pulled the cord controlling the toll house's old window shutter. It slammed open. The guard turned toward the noise. Julian entered from the passage and struck the lamp from the table. Darkness swallowed the room. Samuel dropped to the floor and crawled toward Clara. The guard fired blindly. The shot buried itself in the ceiling, showering plaster over the press. The constable tackled him before he could reload. Harlan ran toward the outer door, but Lady Merrow's coachman blocked it from outside. Within seconds, he was on his knees with his hands bound. Clara cut Samuel's ropes. He threw his arms around her, then pulled back and signed urgently. Edmund killed Lord Wycliffe. Samuel shook his head. Harlan hit him. Edmund watched. Red carriage, moved body. Clara turned to the clerk. Samuel saw you strike Lord Wycliffe. Harlan's courage vanished. Harcourt said the man would expose all of us. All of whom? Harlan glanced at Julian. The certificates bear the Duke's seal. Answer her, Julian said. Harlan swallowed. Lord Edmund planned the false voters. Wycliffe discovered the school names in the borough register. I struck him when he tried to take the ledger. Harcourt ordered us to leave the body on the northern road. The constable pulled the original ledger from the table. Lady Merrow recorded where it had been found, who had touched it, and the time of recovery. Margaret collected the printer's type blocks, while Samuel identified the tray used for the false signatures. Inside a locked drawer, Clara found Edmund's raven signet, the one that had bruised Samuel's palm. They now had a witness, the original ledger, the press, the copied certificates, and the ring. Enough to challenge the election. Enough to prove murder. A horse stopped outside. Harlan's face turned white. He is early. The toll house windows shattered simultaneously. Armed men surrounded the building, and Edmund's voice came through the darkness. Burn the press, take the ledger, and leave no witness alive. Flaming oil struck the outer wall. Fire climbed across the dry timber before anyone could reach the water barrel. Smoke rolled beneath the ceiling, hiding Edmund's men beyond the shattered windows. Take Samuel into the passage, Clara ordered. I am not leaving you, Julian said. This is not the moment to prove devotion. Carry Harlan. The clerk had been struck by broken glass and could barely stand. Julian pulled him upright while Margaret guided Samuel toward the cellar opening. The constable dragged the captured guard behind them. Clara seized the original ledger from the table, but a second bottle of burning oil crashed beside the press. Flames spread across the scattered certificates and cut her off from the passage. Edmund entered through the rear door, with a cloth over his mouth. Give me the ledger. Clara backed toward the window. Lord Wycliffe died for this book, and your husband will hang for it. You used his seal. He gave me the seal. He gave me the school. He signed the accusation. By dawn, every magistrate in the county will believe. Ravensmere ordered the fraud and blamed his wife when Wycliffe discovered it. Julian moved through the smoke toward them. Edmund raised a pistol. Clara threw the ledger across the room. Edmund turned to catch it. Julian struck his arm, and the pistol fired into the printing press. Metal type scattered across the burning floor. The 2 men fell against the table. Clara reached the passage and pulled the cellar door open. The constable dragged Julian through it, but Edmund recovered the ledger before following them. He kicked the door shut from above. A wooden bar dropped into place. The passage went black. Behind them, the toll house roof began to collapse. Samuel took Clara's hand and placed it against the wall. A faint current of cold air moved through a crack beside the floor. He signed against her palm so she could understand in the darkness. Small opening. I used it before. Clara and Margaret tore at the loose stones. The gap widened enough for Samuel to crawl through. On the other side, he lifted the hidden latch that opened an old drainage gate. One by one, they escaped into the ditch behind the toll road. The toll house collapsed moments later. The press, the copied certificates, and the original ledger disappeared beneath the flames. Edmund was gone, so was Harlan. In the confusion, two of Edmund's men had pulled the wounded clerk from Julian and carried him through another branch of the passage. The strongest witness had been taken. The strongest evidence had burned. All Clara still possessed was the bank statement, Lord Wycliffe's narrow page, one planted copybook, Samuel's testimony, and the raven signet she had hidden inside her glove. When she opened her hand, the ring was gone. A tear in the glove showed where Edmund had cut it free during the struggle. By 7 in the morning, the county hall was crowded. The royal examiner sat beside 3 magistrates while voters, trustees, servants, and political agents filled the chamber. Edmund stood at the front in a clean coat, one hand bandaged from the fire. He had arrived before Clara. He claimed Julian had ordered Harlan to create the false certificates. He claimed Clara had trained the children to copy signatures, then imprisoned Harlan at the toll house when he threatened to confess. Finally, he claimed the Duke and Duchess had burned the building together to destroy the evidence. The royal examiner examined Clara's remaining papers. "The trust money is intact," he said. "That disproves the original charge of theft, but it does not prove who created the false voters." Edmund bowed. "Precisely. Where is Mr. Harlan?" "My cousin's men abducted him." Julian stepped forward. "That is a lie. Can you prove it?" The room waited. Julian could have protected himself by allowing Edmund's story to stand. Clara remained formally accused, and the burned press could be blamed upon her. Instead, he removed the Ravensmere badge from his coat and placed it before the royal examiner. "I authorized Edmund to examine the school records," Julian said. "I did not read the full order before signing it." A murmur moved through the chamber. "I also signed a false accusation against my wife after she asked me to verify the money at the bank. I refused because Edmund promised that control of this borough would secure my royal appointment." The examiner's expression hardened. "Are you admitting that political advantage influenced your judgment?" "Yes. Your statement may permanently disqualify you from royal office." "It should." Edmund stared at him. "Think carefully, Julian." "I should have done so yesterday." Julian faced the trustees and donors. "My wife did not steal from the school. I publicly accused her without proof, removed her authority, and placed the children under the control of the man she had warned me to investigate. Whatever crimes Edmund committed afterward were enabled by choices I made freely." Clara watched him correct the record without asking her to soften the cost. It was the first act of repair that required something real from him, but it did not convict Edmund. The royal examiner ordered Julian's appointment withdrawn and suspended his control over the borough election. Then he turned to Clara. "Without the ledger, press, ring, or clerk, we have accusation against accusation. The polls cannot be stopped upon the interpretation of gestures supplied by an interested party." Edmund smiled. Samuel saw it. The boy stepped into the center of the chamber and began signing what he had witnessed beneath the school. Clara interpreted each sentence, but Edmund interrupted. "The child repeats whatever she taught him." Margaret wrote her own translation. It matched Clara's exactly. Edmund dismissed that as conspiracy. One magistrate looked at the clock. "The polls must open in 20 minutes unless decisive proof is produced." Clara felt the case closing around them. Then Samuel made the crooked finger sign for the printing press. Edmund's eyes flicked toward his hand before Clara translated it. She remembered his reaction at the school gate. Samuel had made the same unfamiliar sign, and Edmund had gone pale before anyone explained it. He had also known when Samuel accused 3 men, when the boy identified the ring, and when Margaret warned Clara about the cellar. Edmund had repeatedly claimed that sign language was meaningless, yet he had understood it every time. Clara knelt beside Samuel and signed a question. "Did Edmund ever speak to you with his hands?" Samuel nodded. "At night, when he ordered us to copy names." Clara looked toward the royal examiner. The burned ledger was no longer their only path. She did not need Edmund to confess. She only needed to make him translate a sign he claimed he could not understand. Clara whispered to Samuel, "We are going to tell one lie with your hands and wait for him to correct it." Clara asked the royal examiner for 3 conditions. No one will interrupt Samuel while he signs. Margaret will write her translation before I speak, and Lord Edmund will stand where the child can see his face. Edmund laughed. "Another performance. If the language is meaningless, you have nothing to fear from it." The examiner ordered him forward. Clara positioned Samuel in the center of the chamber. Margaret sat at a separate table with paper and ink. Julian remained among the accused, rather than beside his wife. Clara signed to Samuel. "Tell the truth about Lord Wycliffe. When you reach the ring, say Harlan wore it." Samuel frowned, because that detail was false. Clara added, "Trust me." The boy faced the magistrates and began. He described hiding beneath the school stairs after evening lessons. A red carriage arrived without lamps. Edmund entered with Harlan and another man, leading Lord Wycliffe through the rear passage. Margaret wrote rapidly. Samuel signed that Wycliffe demanded the original donation ledger. The nobleman accused Edmund of turning old charitable addresses into false property claims. Harlan struck Wycliffe with the silver-headed cane when he tried to leave. Then Samuel reached the planned lie. Harlan wore the raven signet on his left hand. Edmund interrupted before Clara translated a single word. "That is not what the boy said yesterday. He accused me of wearing the ring." Silence filled the hall. Clara did not look at Edmund. She waited until Margaret finished writing, folded the paper, and handed it to the examiner. He read the translation. "Lord Harcourt," he said, "how did you know the boy changed his account of the ring?" Edmund's face tightened. His gesture was obvious. Obvious to whom? He pointed at his hand. He identified Harlan, a raven, a ring, and the left hand in a complete sentence. Clara said, "You understood all of it before either interpreter spoke." Clara, I guessed. Then let us test another guess. Clara signed a question directly to Edmund. "Where did you order Samuel to copy the final 20 names?" Edmund kept his hands at his sides. "Translate it," he demanded. "You claimed the language was meaningless. I will not participate in a trick." Samuel stepped closer and signed. "You spoke to me with your hands at night." Edmund looked away. Margaret placed a second written translation before the examiner. Clara addressed the magistrates. "Lord Edmund did not choose deaf children because they could copy better than others. He chose them because most officials would refuse to accept their testimony. He learned enough of their language to control them, then spent this entire inquiry pretending that only I could interpret what they said." The examiner turned to Samuel. "Can the boy show us how Lord Edmund instructed him?" Clara translated the request. Samuel demonstrated the commands Edmund had used: copy, stop, hide, silence, and 20 more. His movements were short and crude, unlike the full language Clara and Margaret used. Edmund's right hand twitched at his side, completing the final motion for silence before he caught himself. Lady Merrow saw it. "So did I," one magistrate said. The royal examiner ordered the clerk to record the gesture. Edmund's calm began to fracture. "None of this places me at the toll house or proves I ordered Wycliffe's death." "No," Clara agreed. "Your own decisions do." She laid the blue counting cord on the table. This cord was taken from Samuel when he was held at the toll house. It carried fresh printing grease before the building burned. Hours later, it was tied around a threat written in your hand and thrown through my window. Anyone could imitate my handwriting. The message demanded that I withdraw a challenge which had not yet been announced publicly. Edmund said nothing. Only the people who knew we had found the press could know we intended to challenge the certificates. "You told Julian, and Julian was confined with me when the stone came through the window." Julian stepped forward. "That is true." Edmund pointed at him. "A husband will lie to save his wife." Julian did not defend himself. Clara did. "He did not lie to save me when his word could have prevented my arrest. Why would he begin after publicly surrendering the office he wanted?" The question unsettled the room because everyone knew its answer. Clara placed the planted copybook beside Lord Wycliffe's page and the bank statement. The supposed theft never occurred. The books appeared in my carriage after Edmund's groom transported it. The school's original ledger was removed under the order Julian signed without reading. Margaret was locked in the cellar after she saw Wycliffe. Samuel was taken in a carriage containing false property certificates. Every stage required the authority Edmund gained when my husband removed mine. The examiner faced Julian. "Did Lord Harcourt possess your school key, seal, servants, and written authority?" "Yes." "Did he promise political benefit in exchange for control of the borough?" "Yes." "Did you verify any accusation against your wife before transferring that authority?" Julian's voice was low but clear. "No." Edmund turned on him. "You signed every order." "I did," Julian said. "That is my guilt. It is not proof of your innocence. The clock showed 7 minutes before the polls were due to open. Edmund recovered enough confidence to smile. You have no original ledger, he said. No press, no ring, no clerk. A child's gestures may embarrass me, but they cannot authenticate one forged certificate. Clara looked toward Lady Merrow. The older woman tapped her cane once against the floor. Before the hearing began, Clara had sent the constable to St. Ormond's house. Edmund had named it as the children's destination, and Harlan was supposedly its manager. If his men needed somewhere to conceal the wounded clerk, they would trust the place, already hidden behind false respectability. The doors of the county hall opened. The constable entered with 3 officers. Between them walked Mr. Harlan, bruised but alive. He carried the original school ledger against his chest. A 4th officer placed Edmund's raven signet and the silver-headed cane on the examiner's table. Edmund stepped backward. The royal examiner opened the ledger to the names on Lord Wycliffe's page, then looked at Harlan. Before the polls open, you will answer one question under oath. Who ordered these names copied and gave you the Ravensmere seal? Harlan looked at the raven signet on the examiner's table. Lord Edmund Harcourt ordered the names copied, he said. He gave me the Ravensmere seal after the Duke signed the school examination order. Edmund lunged toward him, but 2 officers caught his arms. You struck Wycliffe, Edmund shouted. Yes, Harlan said, after you ordered me to stop him. The examiner leaned forward. Why was Lord Wycliffe at the school? He discovered that dead donors had reappeared as property owners in the borough register. He came to warn the Duchess because she knew the accounts and would recognize the fraud. And after you struck him, he was still alive. Lord Edmund refused to summon a physician. He ordered us to place the body beside the northern road and make the death resemble a robbery. Edmund's face hardened. You are saving yourself. No, Harlan replied. I am admitting what I did. You chose the names, controlled the press, and ordered the witnesses silenced. I obeyed you, and Lord Wycliffe died because of it. Clara faced the examiner. Edmund needed the school records to manufacture voters. He needed the children because he believed no court would listen to them. And he needed me publicly disgraced because I was the one person who understood both their language and the accounts. Julian lowered his eyes. My signature gave him access to all 3. The conspiracy no longer depended upon Harlan's word alone. His statement connected the original ledger, the signet, the printing press, Samuel's testimony, and Lord Wycliffe's final page. Lord Wycliffe's page matched 6 altered entries, while the bank statement proved that Clara had never taken the money. The raven signet carried dried black grease from the toll-house press. The silver-headed cane bore a dark stain beneath its handle. It was sealed for examination, alongside the account books and certificates. At 8:08, the examiner suspended the borough election. All 114 false qualifications were struck from the register. A new election would be held under independent supervision. Edmund, Harlan, and 4 accomplices were committed for trial at the assizes. Harlan's cooperation would be reported, but it would not erase his violence against Wycliffe. Edmund faced charges for conspiracy, forgery, kidnapping, attempted destruction of evidence, and his role in the murder. His property was frozen pending claims from Lord Wycliffe's widow and the families whose names he had stolen. Then the examiner addressed Clara. The accusation against the Duchess of Ravensmere is false and malicious. Her accounts were accurate, her trust funds intact, and her actions protected both the witnesses and the integrity of this election. The clerk entered the correction into the public record. Julian stood before the same trustees who had watched him disgrace his wife. I accused Clara without proof, he said. I dismissed the truth because it obstructed my ambition. I closed her school, endangered its pupils, and gave their persecutor the authority she had earned. No manipulation excuses what I chose to do. He surrendered his royal appointment permanently and withdrew from control of the new election. He also requested that Parliament investigate every borough decision made under his seal during Edmund's influence. The cost was not symbolic. His political career ended in that room. Clara's restoration came before any discussion of their marriage. The school building and surrounding land were transferred into an independent trust administered by Clara, Margaret, Lady Merrow, and 2 elected guardians. Julian settled a permanent annual income upon it from his unentailed property. He funded new lodging for every pupil and paid compensation to Margaret for her imprisonment. He also established a separate residence and maintenance for Clara, protected by trustees so that he could neither revoke nor control it. Finally, he signed a declaration that no pupil would ever again be removed without Clara and the independent trustees' consent. Clara accepted the restitution. She did not return to Ravensmere House. 6 months later, the school gates reopened. The chain Edmund had fastened around them lay on a table beside the entrance. Clara took the new key from her pocket and opened the lock herself. 12 children entered first. Samuel paused beneath the restored sign and raised his hands. "We are not silent because others refuse to understand us." Clara repeated the sentence aloud, for the donors gathered outside. Margaret stood beside her as the school's first independent headmistress. Lady Merrow held the new charter. Lord Wycliffe's widow placed his red notebook in a glass case inside the library, where his unfinished investigation would be remembered rather than hidden. Julian remained beyond the gate. He had spent 6 months correcting records, dismissing compromised servants, and answering the royal inquiry. He had written Clara only when information required it. He had not asked her to return, forgive him, or protect his reputation. When the ceremony ended, he approached without crossing the threshold. "I came to return this," he said. He placed the old Ravensmere school key on the table. Clara looked at the chain beside it. "That key no longer opens anything." "I know." Julian lowered himself to one knee, not before an audience of nobles, but before the woman whose trust he had treated as expendable. "I loved what you built when it reflected well upon me," he said. "When it required me to defend you at a cost, I chose myself. I cannot ask you to forget that." "No, I can only continue repairing what my choice damaged, whether you ever return to me or not." Clara studied him. She had once believed that preserving her marriage required enduring whatever Julian feared losing. Now she possessed her own home, lawful financial security, meaningful work, and a community that trusted her voice. Any future between them would exist because she selected it, not because she needed his name. "You will continue living separately," she said. "Yes. You will not interfere with this school. I will not. And if we speak of our marriage again, it will not be as duke and dependent wife." Julian met her eyes. "Then I will come without the title." Clara did not offer forgiveness. Not yet. Instead, she raised her hands and made the first sign he had learned years ago, before ambition taught him to pretend he could not understand. "May I enter?" Julian remembered it. Slowly, he answered, with his own hands. "Only if you invite me." Clara opened the gate, but she did not hand him the key. "You may enter as a guest," she said. "What comes afterward will be decided by time." Julian nodded. "I will wait. If you want a future with me, learn to listen before doubt becomes punishment." Julian rose and waited until she stepped through first. Behind them, Samuel removed the old chain from the table and carried it to the workshop, where the children would melt it down and turn it into 12 small bells, one for every pupil whose silence had finally forced an entire county to listen.